technology. Right. Let's go. I am close enough to the microphone. Forward, back. Right. Cool. Time started. Right. Let's go. Disability tax in gacha games. Social costs of hidden expenses by me, Callum DEERY, and then my co-host Francesca FOFFANO, who unfortunately couldn't be here. Right. What am I going to go over today? What am I going to yap about? So I'm going to do a brief introduction of game accessibility. I'm going to talk about the purchase problem when it comes to games, introduction to disability taxes. Then we're going to move on to Genshin Impact. Shocking for this conference, I know. Introduce the concept of stuckness and talk about emergent barriers. Game accessibility. Right. We'd like games to be played by as many people as possible. Just be nice, right? People could play video games. However, games present a lot of barriers for folks with disabilities. A barrier, in this case, is a mismatch between player capability and a game's demands, right? There's a growing body of research and design work on making games more accessible. A lot of this focuses on addressing individual moment-to-moment barriers. What do I mean by a barrier? Here's a concrete example. If you can identify this daily commission point, I guess. So, Genshin Impact doesn't have text size options, and non-main quests are not voiced. So for players with low vision, any dialogue tree-based quest create a barrier, right? If you have to answer this question and answer, and you can't read the text because it's too small, and you can't tell what the options are because it's too small, how are you going to progress past this, right? So that's a kind of classic example of the kind of barrier we see in games, right? So the purchase problem. What is this purchase problem I'm talking about? Right. Typically, games are expensive, right? $60 US, $70 US, 600 Hong Kong dollars, however much, right? And for players with disabilities, buying a new game that's full price is a gamble, because it's essentially asking, will this game contain a barrier which just prevents them from playing, right? Are they going to get like halfway through and then the game's like, oh, you're red-green colorblind, no more progress for you because there's a puzzle you can't skip here. So community resources are emerging to like address this problem, but they can't review every single game for every set of access needs. So for an example of the community resources, the Can I Play That site. Free-to-play is nice in that it sidesteps this issue, right? If you don't have to put down that money up front and you can just start playing, great. Game demos are also good for this. But it's not perfect. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So, what's a disability tax? Disability taxes are part of a framework that's used in a lot of considerations of how marginalized groups move through societies. Where this form of a tax is additional like labor in the form of either emotional labor, physical labor, or literally money that a person in a minority group has to pay just to like exist in their life, right? The most famous of these is the pink tax, where products are labeled for women and then are placed in a pink box and put at a higher price, right? This is a classic example of a tax. And so this thing we talked about with the purchase problem, that's an example of a disability tax, right? If you're a disabled player and you have to buy multiple games to figure out which one works for you, that's like extra money you're putting down, that's extra labor you're having to do to look at these games and figure out if they're accessible to you. Genshin Impact. I'm using this here as an exemplary case study. It exemplifies existing gacha systems. It's also now a cornerstone of a emerging game genre of like 3D open world gacha games. And there's tons of successor games, Wuthering Waves, Tower of Fantasy, Zero Zero, Arknights Enfield. And so, how does a disability tax form in Genshin Impact? So, this forms out of three systems, and the argument here is one based on continued access to resources. So, first mechanic here is pay to progress, resin. Genshin has a limited daily resin system that you have to spend to maintain yourself on the power curve. It recharges daily, but you can also spend money to have more access to it. There's also the daily login systems. I know the spiral list is not quite daily, but the point is it's a repetitive login, a repetitive task that you have to complete. These systems are the primary access to premium currency, so the currencies through which you get new characters. And there's also the Imagineering Theatre, which they recently added. It works exactly the same as the Spiral Abyss, don't worry about it. Spiral Abyss. And then the final system we have to consider here is character power creep, the banner system. Attaining new characters is the primary driver of Genshin's in-game loop. New characters are typically stronger than previous characters, and attaining additional copies of characters increases their power. Stronger characters are required to clear the spiral abyss and maintain access to premium resources. A few of you might have spotted the problem here. So, here's an example of banners. Right, how bad is the power creep? Right, if I'm arguing that the need to repetitively access new characters is a problem because if you can't do it, then you lose access to resources. How bad is it? Well, it's quite bad. Like, launch character to now. Source for this is a community build tool. So, what does this lead to? This leads to stuckness. Anywhere that you have an unbalanced experience, cool, it can create states in which players are stuck as a consequence of their inability to progress in the game, or because they perceive themselves to be inability to progress. So, what we have is, if at any point as a disabled player you hit a barrier within the spiral abyss or daily commissions, then that creates a punishing feedback loop where your access to resources is continually limited, and then eventually you're just stuck. Yeah, so that's what I just said. And you fall further behind the curve, and then progressively less and less able to access these resources. So, yeah, and the annoying thing about this particular is that it comes out of tiny barrier moments that blow up to blocking the whole experience. And for a disabled player, this is a significant problem, but there is a solution, right? You can just pay. Small addendum, what are people actually talking about? Citations. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We have time for maybe one or two questions. Yeah, Yolene.
Thank you, Callum, for your presentation. I see the feedback loop problem that you're presenting here.
Yeah.
My question is then, how much is just the game doing what it wants to do, right? So it creates an additional barrier for those with a disability.
Yeah.
But isn't this just what this game wants you to do, to just pay?
Yes, this is why this is a problem for the genre, right?
Yes. So how is this for people with a disability an even bigger hurdle?
Yeah.
I know, but I want you to specify it more.
The core of this is that the game's power curve, it relies on playtesting, and it relies on normative playtesting where they assume able-bodied players, right? They make a whole bunch of assumptions about their players and their ability to progress, and that's what the game is balanced around. And in Genshin's specific case, because the spiral abyss and commissions swap around so much, even if a player is normally able to complete it with their access needs, they're basically guaranteed to, at some point, this is going to shuffle round to something that has a perception problem for them, right? The reconfiguring nature of content is basically guaranteed to produce barriers here. Yeah, cool, yes.
One more quick question, if anyone wants to. Yeah, back there, okay. Yeah, hi. My question is, you mentioned disability tax, but how do we determine that whether a player is being pushed to spend money by design rather than by the player simply lacking skills to play the game?
Yeah, so, okay, we've hit the infamous, skill disability debate, right? One of the things is, this is not at all about skill, right? You can be the most skilled player on the planet, you can be the greatest gamer ever, but if you're red-green colorblind and the game is hey, differentiate between this red thing and this green thing, doesn't matter how good you are, right? Or if you're somebody that suffers from repetitive strain injury and the game is oh yeah, we have this new character where you have to spam this button every 0.2 seconds and that's the meta thing, right? It doesn't matter how good you are, right? And so that's the this is not at all a skill question, right? Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.